What is he? Is he a narcissist, a sociopath, a psychopath? All of those things, none of them?
I don't think that he's a psychopath because he's been successful in repeated enterprises over long periods of time, and he has a variety of people who remain intensely loyal to him. Now, he's definitely extroverted to a very great degree, and he's definitely disagreeable. And so that gives him some of the traits that are associated with those personality features. But from what I've been able to understand, he's also very conscientious and hardworking, for example. And so that's a real mitigating factor. And so I think it's very easy to demonize someone that you don't approve of, let's say, and certainly Trump has been subject, I would say, to more demonization than any political leader in the West that I can remember in my entire lifetime, including Richard Nixon. And so that's also set him back on his heels and made him somewhat embattled and defensive, which I don't think did any great things for his personality in some real sense. So I think it's a mistake to assume that Trump is a psychopath. I think it's a big mistake. I think it's a big mistake to assume that Putin is a psychopath. It's easy to do that, but I don't think the evidence suggests that. You don't want to throw those labels around casually. And, you know, if Trump was psychopathic, well, he did a pretty good job of keeping the United States clear of war for 4 years. That's pretty damn remarkable. And he did have a big hand in promoting the Abraham Peace Accords, and that was pretty remarkable. And those aren't the sorts of things that you would expect from a psychopath. He also seems to have a pretty good hand with the working class.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you sound like you're a bit of a fan of Donald Trump. Would you like him to run again? Would it be good for America, do you think?
No, I don't think it would be good for America. Would it be good for him to run? That's a difficult question, because it might be that it would be good for America to have whether or not Donald Trump should be president sorted out in the public sphere, debated intensely, and subject to an election. So it might be very interesting to see him put himself forward on the Republican ticket. If I had my druthers, and I say this, I hope with due care, I would rather see someone like DeSantis step forward, who shares some of that forthright strength, let's say, that characterizes Trump at his best, but seems to be a more cautious administrator and a less divisive figure. I think that would be better, because Trump, for whatever virtues he might have, and I think he has the virtues of a Washington outsider, I think that's quite clear. I think that his behavior in the political realm raises the political temperature to a dangerous degree.
Yeah.
And, you know, I say that while trying to give the devil his due and not casting careless aspersions on his name. I think that compulsion, especially in matters of public policy, is a sign of bad policy. If you can't get people on board voluntarily by motivating them with the proper story, then you're a poor leader. And so I certainly would be opposed to anything approximating legal compulsion. Now, we use social compulsion frequently to produce consensus, let's say, and to enforce it, and that's never going to go away, and there's some utility in that. But my general take on the world is that people should be allowed to go to hell in a handbasket pretty much any way they choose once they're adults, although they might be encouraged not to do that and invited not to do that. But I'm not a fan of compulsion for any reason. I think it is a sign of bad policy. If you and I can't play together voluntarily, then we don't have a very good relationship, and it's not going to be efficient and productive. It's going to require force to continue. And we're not having a fight about who has the right to speak freely. That's nothing. That's a peripheral problem, even though that can be serious in and of itself. We're having a fight about whether or not your claim that free speech exists is nothing but a masquerade for your willingness to dominate and use power. And so if I was taking that tack, I'd say, it's all well and good for you to speak about free speech, but look, you're white and you're middle class and you're British and you're privileged, and you have this theory about free speech that your ancestors derived, but the only reason they ever derived that to begin with is so they could exercise their power. There's no such thing as free speech. That's just a lie to mask a power claim. And that's a way worse cynical criticism of the notion of free speech than you can't speak because I don't agree with it.
I mean, it's a form of fascism, isn't it?
The fascists are more straightforward about it, because they basically come out and say something like, shut up or we'll beat you.
Right.
Whereas the compassionate types who are narcissistic compassionate types, they come out and say, well, we're really trying to save the world, you know, and we're acting in everyone's best interest, and we think it would be better if you should just, you know, regulate what you say, because if you don't, you're not a good person. And so it's much more. I'd take the fascist bully over the compassionate narcissist anytime. They're way more straightforward.
I mean, we live again in an era where the hashtag be kind almost invariably is used by people who are the least kind people I think I've ever encountered. In other words, people that love to be utterly vicious.
Yeah, well, kindness.
And yet they hide behind this fake persona of hashtag be kind.
Yeah. Well, kindness is tricky, you know, because one of the things you deal with very commonly if you're a clinical psychologist, apart from depression and anxiety, is, well, behavior therapists offer assertiveness training. And now, the people who need assertiveness training are often people who are too agreeable, compassionate, polite by temperament. Now, the problem with that is that they let people walk all over them because they don't stand up enough for themselves. And the consequence of that is they get resentful, and then they get bitter, and then they get conniving, and then they'll mob. And so, because they'll do anything for everyone else, but they push themselves beyond their limits, and then they won't even recognize the limits because they feel, well, if I'm not doing everything for you, then I'm not a good person. It's like, no, a good person does a little for you. Like if I'm acting properly with you, say in this conversation, there's something in it for you, and there's something in it for me, right? And we want that to be reciprocal. And so the cost of me bending too far in your direction is that I'll become bitter and resentful and conniving. And resentment is an unbelievably toxic state of being. Now, in my situation, the situation my family has been in, we've been subject to intense attempts at cancellation dozens of times. Some of them of ridiculous intensity and duration. And we've learned that if we had been careful, and so that's important, I do my best not to say things that I believe are false. And so generally, it's been very difficult for those who want to cancel me to actually point to something I said to manage the cancellation. The truth will set you free. You might say, well, if I say the truth, I'm going to get into trouble. Fair enough, but if you abide by the lie, you're also going to get into trouble. And so one of the things you can do instantly is disabuse yourself of the notion that there's a zero trouble pathway. It's like you're in trouble both ways, like real trouble. You get to pick your trouble. That's all you've got. You get to pick your trouble. Okay, so the rule is you can't offend anyone. All right? Let's say you're speaking to one person. I can't offend you. All right, fair enough. What if I'm speaking to 10 people? Do I get to offend 1 in 10? How about 1 in 100? How about 1 in 1,000? You're going to come out on stage and you're going to say something important about something vital, and you're not going to offend 1 person in 1,000? Well, you can't say anything about anything important ever without offending probably the person you're talking to. Important speech about important issues, especially contentious issues, is instantly offensive. If you're being required to do things that make you weak and ashamed, then stop. Don't do them. Like one of the things I learned from Solzhenitsyn and Frankl was that systems go terribly out of control when people don't stop them when they're going mildly out of control. You know, and you might say, oh, I should just keep my goddamn head down and shut up. It's like, maybe you should. Like, that's not bad advice. You know, you don't want to make unnecessary enemies, and you don't need any more trouble than you need. But you got to ask yourself on a day-to-day basis, what makes you think you're not selling your soul? You know, and there's so much foolishness going on in the mid-level bureaucratic world now. That's where all the tyranny seems to be focused. And the reason that it multiplies is because sensible people say nothing when they should say something. And what's so strange about that is that there are way more sensible people than people who aren't sensible. They're just not as noisy. So what you'll turn out if, like, so let's say something's bugging the hell out of you at work. Well, then you have to prepare to find another job. That's the first thing you have to do. I don't think that you should find another job, but you should prepare to find another job. And if possible, you should prepare to find a better job. Because if you can't tell someone to go to hell, then you can't negotiate with them. And if they've got you over a barrel, then you can't say anything. So you gotta set yourself up so you've got some mobility. And actually, that's a really good principle in your life, period. You should set yourself up so that you have a lateral move at hand. And then you should find out, well, are there things at work that are disturbing my soul? And you find that out. First of all, you ask yourself, okay, I'm disturbed at work. Okay, I'm probably weak and deceitful and useless and lazy. You might as well start with that. And then you talk to some people, like your wife, your friends, your co-workers, and find out, are you stupid, deceitful, and lazy? Or is there something not so good going on at work? And so if you can then eliminate your own personal pathology as a cause of your dissatisfaction, then maybe there's something rotten in the state of Denmark. And maybe you should say something about it before the whole goddamn thing collapses, because that can happen. It can happen in companies a lot faster than people ever think. And you may find that, well, first of all, you may find if you say something, well, first of all, that's an adventure, that's for sure. That's a bloody adventure. And you have to do it carefully. And you have to be prepared for it. But it might be the best thing that ever happened to you. And the other thing is, if you're careful about it, you get your words right. Like, and this is strategic battle, right? It's not something you wander into carelessly. Then you may find that there's lots of people who feel exactly the same way you do, and that you've actually cottoned on to something. You're a canary in a coal mine, and not just some like psychopathic mouthpiece. So you got to ask yourself when you go and do what you do, like, is this making you stronger? Is this making you weaker? And if it's making you weaker, then you got to ask yourself, do you really want to be weaker? Because the weaker you get, the more you're tyrannized. And then worse than that, like, the weaker you get, the more bitter you get. And the more you'll work towards terrible things, the more you'll snap at your wife, the more you'll kick your kids, Like, it's no joke to be tyrannized at work. And so I would say you have an ethical responsibility as a citizen to forthrightly confront creeping tyranny no matter where it occurs. And part of what we're learning, I would say, from these stories, if we're learning anything at all, is that if you're aimed at the good, which is a question you really got to ask yourself, if you're genuinely aimed at the good, then take heart, because you're a lot stronger than you think. And better to argue than to fight, unless you want to fight. And some people want to fight, and I can understand why, but I wouldn't recommend it, because that doesn't lead good places. It really doesn't lead good places. So I'd say you have a duty. Maybe that's why you stand up. It's because you have a goddamn duty to stand up and just say what you have to say. You don't even have to be trying to make a point exactly or trying to get something done. It's like, this is how it looks to me.